Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, May 15th, 2008. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. But this week, the Mad Fermentationist Michael Tonsmeire shares 3 beers that were hopped in non-traditional ways. Or at least if you consider putting bittering hops at the beginning of the boil traditional, then these will be non-traditional ways. If you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. And you can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing, all one word. I want to give Bonus Beer Bob from The Good Beer Show a big shout-out. Not too long ago, Jeffrey T. posted a video on The Good Beer Show site of Bob brewing a big old IPA. I think it was Pliny the Elder clone, maybe. And it wasn't that I hated the shirt that Bob was wearing, but I thought a Basic Brewing t-shirt might have been a little nicer for Bob to be brewing with. So I sent Bob a shirt and an advanced DVD combo, just a goodie bag there for him. And after sipping Dark Lord on this week's Good Beer Show, Bob gave us a mention, so I thought I'd return the favor. The Good Beer Show's been, Jeffrey T. and the Good Beer Show, they've been around forever, and I still listen to the Good Beer Show every week. I don't think I've missed one. And Bob is pretty much the voice of home brewing on that show, and I really appreciate Bob spreading the word about the hobby and keeping home brewing, at the forefront of what's going on with the Good Beer Show. Another reminder, I'm going to take off the month of June in posting the audio podcast every week. You might hear a special report or two from the National Homebrewers Conference in Cincinnati, but due to family vacation and my birthday and all that kind of stuff, I'm going to take a break from posting the podcast in June. But don't worry, we'll be back after NHC with lots of good stuff. And we hope to see you in Cincinnati. If you live around that area, we hope to see you at the conference. We're going to try to do some live video streaming while we're out there as well, so keep your eye on Twitter and on the Basic Brewing Radio RSS feed for updates on when those might be. I'll probably post a short little announcement on the Basic Brewing Radio feed when we're going to be doing one of those. We did a live test this week while we were taping this week's Basic Brewing video episode, and that seemed to work just fine. And I appreciate the handful of folks who tuned in for that. Not fair doing it, in the middle of the afternoon on a work day, but I'm planning to do another live streaming event when we record our Green Brewing show in the next week or so. And that'll be in the evening, so more of you will be able to tune in. So that'll be good. It's fun doing a live show. A little bit intimidating, but nonetheless, we didn't mess up too bad with everybody. We did did a little restart, but we got to show everybody kind of behind the scenes with how we tape Basic Brewing video there in the kitchen. Well, let's take a look in the mailbag, shall we? Don Osborne, who you heard last week on our show talking about dandelion wine, wrote in with a response to Tim from Richmond, Virginia, who was worried that his cat boxes were infecting his beers. Well, Don says, for what it's worth, I don't think brewing around a litter box has anything to do with the listener's poor-tasting beer. Don says, I've done many brewing procedures in my laundry room where there are 2 litter boxes. He says, I've not had a single infection or off flavor because of this. In fact, my beers have placed in all 3 contests they've been entered in. Don says, if the listener is having an off flavor, it must be due to something else. And Don also says, I should mention that my litter boxes are the covered kind, and maybe that helps contain the dust. Also, I will usually clean them out before doing a brewing procedure just to be safe. Well, thanks, Don. So you can brew with litter boxes in the same room. It'd be okay. And I've tasted Don's brews, and I didn't taste any kitty litter in there that I detected. If I did, it tasted good, so, go. Ricky from Middlebury, Vermont wrote in after hearing our talk with Don about dandelions. Ricky says, I, too, spent some time on Jack Keller's site trying to figure out what to do with my dandelions. At last, I decided that I already have enough beer and mead that I'll be waiting 2 years to try. Not a patient man, Ricky. So instead of making a dandelion wine, I used the same picking and soaking technique as Don, though I left mine soaking for 2 days, and used the water to brew a 3-gallon extract batch of a Kolsch. I thought that the floral aroma would not be entirely out of place, and it will certainly accent the color. It should be ready for tasting in a few weeks. That sounds like fun. I hope you write in and let us know how that turns out, Ricky. Clay from Raleigh, North Carolina writes, I was excited to listen to your Dandelion Wine show last week. I had just recently read Radical Brewing about 2 weeks ago and was out for a run around the lake and got a most inspiring whiff of honeysuckle. My first thought was honeysuckle blonde ale. Last Thursday, I brewed up a nice blonde ale, and yesterday I went out to pick some honeysuckle blossoms. My plan is to extract the aromas from these blossoms as well as sanitize them in some golden rum and filter and add this to the beer during secondary. Clay says, I was wondering if any other home brewers have made anything similar to this. I've heard of some hibiscus brews, and if any other methods had worked better, for example, dry hopping. It's a good question. I'd like to hear more about brewing with flowers. If you've done it, let me know. Drop me a line at james@basicbrewing.com or just use the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. And please check your email address to make sure that you're spelling it properly. Paul Charlesworth, who you've heard on our Measuring and Predicting IBUs show from a while back, writes, yes, you can make a rose wine. Paul says, check out this book for other crazy ideas. The book is Making Wild Wines and Meads, 125 Unusual Recipes Using Herbs, Fruits, Flowers, and More. That's by Patty Vargas from and Rich Gulling, I believe. Paul says, I really like it. Cool. Well, there you go. Making Wild Wines and Meads, 125 Unusual Recipes Using Herbs, Fruits, Flowers, and More. Cool. Thanks, Paul. I did a search for edible flowers after mentioning roses on the show. I didn't want to tell people, to eat something that would hurt them. So it turns out there's a long list of flowers that you can eat or brew with, including roses. So there's yet another ingredient group that can go into the brew pot and or into the fermenter. Chris from Haverford, Pennsylvania writes in to pick a nit, so to speak. Chris says, the hops you're growing, or not growing, it sounds like, on your property that are genetically Goldings hops, these are also grown in eastern Kent, and when they are, they're known as East Kent Goldings. When the same cultivar is grown in Arkansas, you could call it Arkansas Goldings, but it's not East Kent Goldings. Good point, Chris. From now on, they'll be Arkansas Goldings. Chris says, if you think that's confusing, Styrian Goldings are actually Fuggles, and don't get me started on Columbus, Tomahawk, and Zeus. By the way, my first-year Pennsylvania Goldings are behaving just like your Arkansas Goldings so far. What is up with that? Chris didn't say what is up with that. That's me. I appreciate the clarification there, Chris. And I've gotten other messages from listeners and viewers whose Goldings, wherever they are underperforming. So I guess I feel a little better that I'm not alone in my poor performance with my Arkansas Goldings. Okay, we got a fairly long interview with lots of good info from Michael Tonsmeire, so let's get to it. Mike Tonsmeire is the author of the Mad Fermentationist blog and has wowed us in the past with his beers that have been brewed with offbeat methods. And this week I've asked Mike to talk about hopping methods that he's used that are a bit out of the box. Well, Michael Tonsmeire, welcome to Basic Brewing Radio.
Thanks for having me on again, James.
Well, I'm flying solo tonight. Usually I'm surrounded by other beer tasters, but we have a short flight of beers today.
I guess my last batch scared the other guys off. Huh?
No, that was the Belgian sugar experiment continued, right? So
yeah,
those were we had a fun night that night. That was a good one.
Yeah.
It was the previous one, the sour beers that were kind of interesting. There were some very good ones, and then there were a couple of those that would have scared somebody away, I think.
Toe curlers, yeah.
Or when you said the word toe, I thought that was the source of your fermentable components there.
My secret's out.
First, start the foot bath. That's your first. But we're going to talk about alternative hopping strategies.
Yeah.
This evening, and I got the idea to interview you on this topic when I read your post on the IPA, which is going to be the first beer that we're tasting, and I think the title of your post was "What Hop Shortage?" Right?
Yeah.
So it is kind of the wasteful SUV of beers at this particular time.
It might not be as bad as a double IPA, but it's pretty wasteful given the current situation.
Not only in the amount of hops that you used, but the strategy in using the hops. But before we go on with the process, why don't we crack it open?
Sure.
And give it a try. And like I said, I don't have a crew here this evening to help with the pouring and all that. And you sent a big bottle with this one. I hope it's good.
Hopefully.
Now it's cloudy. It pours cloudy. Kind of a dark golden, maybe?
Yeah, no, it's definitely cloudy. It's chill haze. I used gelatin on this one to clear it before adding the dry hops for about my first time ever. So if it gets up to about 45 degrees, it's pretty clear, but cold, it's pretty hazy.
And we should say that all three of these beers were judged in a contest this past weekend.
Yep, the Spirit of Free Beer. It's put on by my local homebrew club, Burp.
And so to put extra pressure on me, you've got the results, you've got the score sheets in front of you.
I do.
So my judging this beer will be judged by the results of your judging of the beer from the contest. It's a meta judging.
So this one has a nice thick head, I'm getting, sort of a creamy white color, good lacing so far. Yeah,
very, very thick. And lots and lots and lots of grapefruit. I mean, this smells like grapefruit juice.
I think it's very sort of citrusy, very sort of that classic Northwestern, big American hop aroma.
Oh, yeah.
I should say this is all Simcoe and Amarillo. All whole leaf, all from fresh hops. I got a pretty big order from them in the fall, and I hadn't been using much of them because of the shortage. I just decided might as well use them while I still have them, while they're still deserve at peak freshness.
So the hop aroma is just incredible. Like I say, it's grapefruit juice. I mean, it just hits those notes in my brain. I'm gonna taste.
I think the flavor is pretty smooth. I mean, it definitely isn't as bitter as a lot of sort of big American IPAs, but it definitely has a solid bitterness to it.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, there's, boy, that's the hop flavor is also very strong.
Yeah. Not too much malt to it. Maybe a little bit of toastiness in the back there, but it's definitely a hop forward beer.
Oh yeah, this is hop juice.
Yeah,
this is all about the hops. This is nothing about the malt backbone. Although the body of the beer is substantial enough to support it, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
It's not watery.
Pretty good carbonation.
Boy.
And so Would you like to hear the recipe?
Yeah. Let's talk about, rather than just spending 30 minutes savoring the beer. Let's talk. Although I will probably do that afterwards. Let's talk about this. I mean, this is, I called it the wasteful SUV of IPAs. You did just about everything that you can do to hop a beer besides put hops into the boil, correct?
Yeah. Amazing that it's bitter and it has hop flavor and all that. I added some Amarillo, a half an ounce for a 4-gallon batch to the sparge water, sort of steeped in the sparge water as it was coming up to temperature. I put half an ounce in with the mash, so just whole hop leaves or hop cones floating in with the grain for the hour it was in there. Then I did another ounce of Amarillo in a grain bag in with the first runnings as the beer was coming out. First wort hopping was normally referred to, but whereas first wort hopping, you'd leave the hops in the beer throughout the entire boil. As soon as my beer came to a boil, I pulled them out.
So just to go over it, in the mash, you've got hops.
Yeah.
In the sparge water that you're using to sparge the mash, while you're heating that up, you've got hops in there. And even as I'm moving my sparge water over, the hops are coming with it into the mash. Okay, and then the hops are additional hops are in a bag in the brew pot as you're running the wort from the mash tun into the brew pot, and then as you're bringing the wort up to temperature, up to boil, those hops stay in there, and as soon as you hit the boil, that bag comes out.
I pulled them out, and I left it sort of holding it over the kettle so that the whatever liquid was still with them would fall back in.
Now, I told Andy Sparks about this, and he said, but I thought the whole purpose of having a vigorous boil was to knock the bitter stuff off the hops, and then isomerize it.
Yeah.
So where's the bitterness come from?
So my understanding, and I'm not a hop expert, so your listeners are free to write in and complain about the poor quality of my information, but is that the hop alpha acids can dissolve into the wort below the boiling temperature, and then since they're already in there during the boil, they will isomerize.
So you're essentially, as you're putting them in the hot water and the sparge water, you're putting them into the mash at temperature. You're putting them. You're bringing those alpha acids with the hops as you're bringing it up to boil. There's enough of those alpha acids going into solution, being kind of leached off or falling off or dissolving off, whatever they do. Those are, even though the hops are taken out, the physical cones themselves are taken out, the alpha acids are in the wort at that point to be boiled and to be isomerized or chemically altered and to become bitter.
Exactly. And clearly, I mean, you can see how, say with dry hopping, I mean, there's no heat at all and you still get, I mean, those hop oils and resins that give the aroma, but I assume, also in addition to that, you're leaching out some of the alpha acids, and they just aren't being isomerized in that case, and that's why dry hops don't add any bitterness to a beer.
Ah, that's a good point. Yeah, if nothing came off the hops, then dry hopping would be useless.
Exactly. And the same thing with flame out hops. If you add right at the end of the boil, nothing would be coming off, but as we all know, you get a lot of aroma from those hops.
And speaking of flame out, you after the boil's over, you continued the hopping process.
Sure. So after a 90-minute boil, I add another ounce of Amarillo and half an ounce of Simcoe. I find that Simcoe is a little bit more pungent than Amarillo, and if you use equal quantities, I mean, it's fine, it makes a delicious beer, but you taste much more Simcoe, and the Amarillo is just sort of an accent. And then I use the same quantities for dry hopping after a 2-week fermentation, and after I removed a lot of the yeast with gelatin. There's a great PDF by Vinny Cilurzo at Russian River, sort of his tips for hoppy beers. And one of them is to get as much of the yeast out of suspension before you dry hop as possible. I guess the yeast are happy grabbing onto hop acids and other compounds, and then pulling them out of solution when they fall.
Yeah.
So the more of those you can get out of there, the better, the more efficient your dry hops will be.
Yeah, I think we had a similar conversation, I believe, with John Palmer in measuring IBUs, and some of those alpha acids. He was saying with some beers, the particulate matter inside in the wort can pull some of those bitterness units out, or some of those alpha acids out. Exactly. Yeah. So this beer is certainly bitter enough for my taste.
It calculated out. So this was a 1064 beer. It was mostly Golden Promise, and then just a little bit of Carapils and wheat malt. And I got all the way down to 1012. So it's actually a pretty dry beer.
Mm. Wow.
And the calculated IBUs, I think I have the Rager formula. And just counting the hops I pulled out at the start of the boil as regular first wort hops, it's 72 IBUs.
Wow.
It doesn't taste that high to me.
Well, as it's warming up, it's the bitterness is becoming more sharp to my taste. It's kind of lingering more on my tongue, I think. But I guess I got to ask the question, why? Other than just a wacky experiment. Why did you choose to follow this unorthodox hopping strategy?
Well, this is actually sort of based on a beer that one of my former brew partners and I did about 2.5 years ago as a second runnings beer, just sort of as a crazy experiment. We did a English barley wine with the first runnings, and then we did a Party Guile in the second runnings. We did this no boil idea, some first wort hops. And I think at the time, I don't even remember if it was a fun new idea or if I just didn't understand first wort hopping. And just sort of thought that you were supposed to remove them. Why would you leave them in? They would just be the same as regular, regular bittering hops. For a reason, I removed them, and I thought the beer was delicious. And then so a couple years later, I said, hey, why don't I do that again and see if it really was delicious, or that was just my 6 months into home brewing palate, and I was way off base.
Now, I think you mentioned on your blog, you said that you did it because adding a ton of hops in some beers gives like a vegetal taste to your palate.
Yeah. To my palate, if you really load the hops in there, you can you lose so much wort, and then when you're adding them to the boil, you're losing sort of that final gravity of the wort. You're losing sort of the final volume. Whereas if you add them at the beginning, you're sort of absorbing a much lower gravity wort. You're absorbing, the 1040 wort before as opposed to the 1065 wort after the boil. I think it definitely can give sort of a vegetal or grassy flavor on those beers that you really sort of cram the hops in. And not necessarily in a bad way, but in a, it sort of, to me, competes with the citrus and the floral and, sort of the more nuanced hop components.
Now, are there some practical ways or practical reasons to do it this way? I mean, you used whole hops, and I tend to use pellet hops because whole hops can be little wort sponges that rob me of that that beer that I want. Are there some practical reasons if you're taking some of the hops out in the bag in the beginning, you don't have to contend with them at the end, I guess?
It's just much easier, I think, to sort of get the hops out. I mean, with pellets, even if you put them in sort of a loose bag, you'd probably, be getting some hops in there. But
at the end, you're not left with so much of a salad in the bottom of your brew pot.
Exactly. It makes transferring a lot easier and makes all those sort of brew day chores a little bit simpler.
Well, no surprise. I think that beer was delicious. What did the judges say?
Well, this one got panned.
Oh,
it got a 26.
Oh my, that's harsh. In what category?
As an American IPA.
Huh.
And part of it, for the most part, the judges didn't seem to think it had much hop character at all.
Oh, what? What? No hop character at all.
Maybe a hint of citrusy hops, but it's not very distinct. I also get a bit of perfume, almost lavender. That's not right in an IPA. Someone else thought there were hops, but also sharp/hot alcohol.
Yeah. Wow. I got none of that. And I'm not just saying that just to be, nice.
Someone said that I should look for a different hop because the hops weren't right for an American IPA.
Okay. Well,
I mean this also isn't sort of bottom rung guys. I mean I've got a master judge, I've got a pro brewer, I've got a sort of a wide range of people who who some of whom I know and respect the opinions of, but
I just wonder where it was tasted in the flight. I just
Very
wonder
true.
if there were some just absolute monster hop bombs, that were really entirely way bitter, came before this and kind of blew out their taste buds before your beer came along.
I'm also sort of on the low end of the style. It's only about a 6.5% beer, and the style goes up past 7. So,
but then they said that there was alcohol. So that's bizarre.
Which I don't get. I mean,
No.
I mean, to me, it sort of has a very strong citrusy aroma, and not much else.
Wow, that's about nothing but hop character. I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh well.
I agree. Okay.
Okay. Well, all right. You take your. You enter contests to get feedback. So
exactly. And the fact that all the judges seem to sort of agree on that, says that there is, something going on there. Even if it's not, something wrong with the beer. I mean, it's something that just wasn't quite right.
Huh. That's interesting. Well, let's pop the cap on the second one. This is a barley wine beer, and tell us about this one.
This one was done with my friends Scott Wise and Josh Ney. It was sort of a group use-up leftover ingredients brew. Everyone brought over, whatever they had, half-pound bags of specialty malt, a couple pounds of base grain, whatever hops were still sticking around in our freezer from the previous harvest last October. And we sort of, put everything out on a table and came up with this as the first drawings. Then there was a sort of a robust porter. We threw in a little bit of dark malt to cap the mash, and then used some English hops. So that was just sort of, it's really a complex, malt bill that has no real reason except that we had all those things. I think there's about 9 malts in there, everything from pale to Pilsner to Vienna, Munich, flaked wheat, Crystal 120, Special B, Special Roast, Crystal 60.
Mulligan beer, Mulligan Stew beer.
Exactly.
Now the nose on this is completely, I don't know about completely, it's way different from the first one.
Yeah. Nowhere near as hoppy.
No, and how old is this beer?
This was brewed October 10th last year.
Okay, so it's got a little age on it.
About 7 months old. So, it's certainly not too old for a barley wine, but this was very, very hoppy when it was fresh for about the first 3 or 4 months in the bottle. And then since then is really sort of, I think it's still tasty, but originally we almost debated calling it an American double IPA.
It's got some dark notes to it, a lot of dark. There's maybe a little bit of kind of molasses in there, maybe?
Molasses, maybe some raisins or something like that. And so for the hopping on this one, we just sort of took all the American hops, or anything even close to American that we had, mixed them all up. It was Chinook, Simcoe, Summit, Warrior, Cascade, Nugget, Amarillo, Centennial. And I think about 10 ounces total.
So go ahead. Sorry.
And so every 5 minutes for the last 35 minutes, we just took 1.5 ounces and threw it in the pot. Sort of like the Dogfish Head, 60-minute thing, but sort of a little scaled down and only for the last half an hour.
So the reason that this is an alternate brewing strategy is that you didn't toss in bittering hops at the beginning of the boil. This is a late hopped beer.
Yeah. Some people refer to this as hop bursting. Just the idea that you're, adding, sort of a burst of hops every couple of minutes. And And the idea is that, I mean, even with adding hops only for the last 35 minutes, it calculated out to 150 IBUs. So, as a couple, John Palmer and a couple of your guests, I think, in the past have discussed, whether it be a solubility limit or a threshold of taste limit, you really can't get past 100. And so at that point, there's, if you want to get all of that hop flavor and aroma near the end, there's really no use in putting bittering hops in. They're just sort of going to waste.
Right. Sucking
up wort, costing money.
Now, there is a bit of hoppy brightness in the nose, but it's not nearly, they're not nearly as distinct as the first one.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna taste. That's going to take a minute to process.
Yeah, so it's really a malt bomb at this point. I mean, it's got some bitterness in there, and maybe a little citrusy something from the hops. But for the most part, it's somewhere between a barley wine and an old ale and a wee heavy, maybe.
Oh, that's nice. There's enough bitterness in there to balance the maltiness. What was the starting gravity and the finishing gravity?
1092. I don't think it got down too much into the 1020s. 1028. About 70% attenuation. We mashed at 151, and I think we used. Oh, it's actually London ale yeast.
Huh. There's some brown sugar notes in there. But I think probably the hops have faded since October.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not nearly as the hop flavor and aroma is not nearly as in your face as it probably once was. Yes, but it's a nice beer. It doesn't mean that it's a bad beer. It's just aged. It's got some age on it.
Yeah. And one thing with the IPA is I actually only balled that about 3 weeks ago now, so that is a very, very fresh IPA. It was sort of just came into carbonation about a week and a half ago, so it's sort of the other end of the freshness spectrum as far as hops go.
Wow. Well, the bitterness is certainly there.
Yeah.
There's quite a bit of lingering bitterness afterwards. So, you're right. You didn't need the bittering hops at the start of the boil, whether it's 60 minutes or 90 minutes. There's plenty of bitterness in there.
Exactly. I mean, this sort of is sort of a thrifty thing. If you still want to do a big hoppy beer, consider cutting out those bittering hops because maybe they're not really adding much. If you're really loading hops in near the end of the boil.
Oh, that's tasty. It reminds me of a beer that I can't remember. It's like I wish my Rolodex, worked. That's good. I think it's good. What did the judges say?
So this one did better, 30, but did not. The complaint sort of was it wasn't hoppy enough. It should have been entered as an English barley wine. Too malty. We did use the English ale yeast in there, so it does have some of that English fruity character. So if we'd entered it maybe 3 or 4 months ago, it probably would have done pretty well as American barley wine.
Is it similar to Anchor's Old Foghorn? Have you had that?
Yes, no, I think that is pretty similar because I think that's sort of an English style but uses American hops.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's good. I think it's better than the 30, but I think it's probably. I'm just curious to know what it would have done had it been entered in the other category.
Yeah, so they say things like fruit and sweet, candy-like with a hint of alcohol. I'd like more hops for American barley wine. Rich. Well, somebody says rich hop flavor with notable fruitiness, maybe a slight phenolic plastic taste in background, slightly sweet finish. Good hop bitterness. That sort of general kind of malt sweetness dominates. Slight hop bitterness follows. Very dry aftertaste. I'm not sure I agree with the dry aftertaste, but sort of the idea that I guess American barley wine should be, not as sweet, not as malty, more hoppy.
Well, That's interesting. Well,
we probably should have gone with sort of an American ale yeast that's gonna get a little bit drier, be cleaner, that sort of thing.
Well, it depends on what you're shooting for. I mean, it's all as David Myers from Redstone Meadery says, it's all in what you like. What do I put in my meads? Well, it's all in what you like. It's if you like an English style barley wine, and this is a good one. Then you made the right choices. So,
although I almost imagine if it was entered in English, it might be too hoppy and too much of that bitterness. English ones tend to be sort of the overly sweet, but maybe with another year or two of age, the bitterness will mellow out enough that it will be more English, I guess.
Well, that's interesting. So now we've done hopping everywhere but the boil, and we've done hopping in the boil, but not at the traditional bittering point at the beginning of the boil, all the last part of the boil. Now we go on to the next beer, and I'm going to take a little sip of water because this is going to be changing gears.
Sour beer coming up.
My taste bud, my saliva glands are gleeking as they as they hear those words. So this is a Berliner Weiss.
Yeah.
And tell us about this one.
So this one was brewed back in, I believe, middle of January. Yeast put out one of their VSS strains, a special release, a Berliner Weiss blend. So like they have the Roselaire blend, they have the Lambic blend. They put out a special one just for Berliner Weisses. Which is great because normally you'd have to buy a packet of lactobacillus, a packet of some sort of European ale yeast, and then maybe a Brettanomyces. And for this one, I guess they actually founded Brettanomyces from a now defunct Berliner Weiss brewery. They used the correct lacto, they used the correct Saccharomyces, and all for just sort of $5.99 or whatever a pack of yeast goes for. And so for this one, I did mostly Pilsner malt with about 30% of wheat malt, which is sort of the standard. Germans always use malted wheat. Belgians often use the unmalted wheat in lambics or wits or that sort of thing. Pulling up the recipe. And then so what the twist on this one was I added to a 3.5 gallon batch, I had half an ounce of Willamette hops to the mash. I then did a single decoction mash. I mashed in at 123. I pulled the decoction. Apparently, I didn't pull enough because when I put it back in, it only got up to 136.
Ooh.
Then I infused some more hot water and got up to 146. Then some more hot water and got up to 154. And I left it there for... So I did 45 minutes at 146 to make sure it really dries out. And then I got up to 154 just to make sure that it finished conversion. And then I sparged like normal, except I only collected about 3.5 gallons of wort. And then I brought it up to a boil, but I then just immediately cut off the boil as soon as the surface tension broke. And I chilled it, and I just pitched, I smacked the smack back and dumped in. I didn't make a starter. I didn't do anything else. I left it alone for about 2 weeks, and then I racked it to secondary until about 3 weeks ago when I bottled it.
So this no boil, an all grain beer,
boil.
No boil, and
Exactly.
somewhere David Matthews is smiling. David Matthews from the home brewery. A couple weekends ago, we were talking with Andy Sparks there, and David was talking about doing an all grain beer and doing a no boil. And Andy and I were all over him. You can't do that. There are reasons that you do a boil. There's protein coagulations. There's volatilization of, DMS precursors. And, we listed all the reasons.
Sanitation, all that stuff.
Exactly. There's all the reasons that you do a boil. Isomerizing the hops. And he stuck to his guns and said, he'd read the recipe and he was going to do it. And we were like, well, okay, you just go do that. And, here you are. So why not do a boil here? I mean, how can you get away with not doing a boil?
Well, part of it is actually tradition. This is the traditional way that Berliner Weisses were made. the lactobacillus in sort of the original formulations actually came from the grain. Sort of in the same way that people do a sour mash, people used to just leave that lactobacillus going from the mash into the beer, throw some regular brewer's yeast in, and there's your sour beer after a number of months. I did sort of just for that reason. It also, I mean, have you poured yours yet?
Yeah, there's
gives it a really pale sort of, you know, even lighter than Budweiser sort of color, because you aren't getting any of those Maillard reactions or anything like that happening in the boil. So yeah,
it's very carbonated, frosty white head.
Yeah, nice big,
very
big
pale. It's almost it's a few shades darker than lemonade, but very light in color. The aroma is funky, of course.
Mostly sort of that yogurty, tart, sour. You know, maybe a little bit of Brettanomyces, but not that much, I don't think.
Yeah, there's just a hint in the same way that the hops were bright in the barley wine. I think the Brett character is kind of bright in this nose.
Yeah,
but then there's some darker, funky notes. Maybe sulfury a little bit.
Could be, and that's one of the things with Pilsner malt, no boil, there could be some dimethyl sulfate in there with a little bit of corn or a little bit of sulfury vegetal.
Yeah, because you're not boiling that out at all.
Exactly. The hope would be that when you're making a sour beer like this and you've got Brettanomyces and lactobacillus in there, is that they are hopefully going to eat some of those precursors and post-cursors and any sort of cursors that are in there, and make it a cleaner beer than it, say, would be. You know, in the same way that with Alambic, you know, often you use old hops or you use, you know, that sort of thing. You know, over the long aging period, a lot of those things will drop out. And for a Berliner Weiss, this is still very young. Often they're aged for a couple of years. A few weeks ago, I'm taking a class for the BJCP, and someone had a bottle of a 12-year-old Berliner Weiss from one of the big German breweries that does them, Schultheiss, and it was still pretty good. It wasn't great. It was a little bit oxidized, but for a 3% alcohol beer that was 12 years old, it was doing very well.
There's a little bit of leather, and a little bit of just half a note of rubber, maybe.
Could be. The leather is definitely Brettanomyces. That's very common in sort of English old ales or old style British stouts. We'll get some of that leathery, you know, sort of funk. And so part of the idea with this too is that lactobacillus at about 8 IBUs will completely stop working, because, as we all know, hops are a preservative. So lactobacillus, you know, is preserved by them. I mean, that's one of the reasons that you hop a beer, you know, to keep lactobacillus at bay. But in this case, where you want it, you have to make sure not to put much hop in. ProMash says this is half an IBU, so
not much hop character in this beer.
Traditionally, German brewers actually add hops to the mash so that they could help in the lautering. Adding hops that way, you know, just because you've got all that all that malted wheat, but it still doesn't have a husk. The hop leaves or the hop cones could get in there and maybe make some spaces, make the mash flow a little bit easier. And so that's another reason to do it. But I didn't have any sort of mash issues.
This is not a beginner's beer.
No,
it is very thin.
This went from 1032 down to 004. It's very carbonated. It's a style. This is actually probably undercarbonated. I aimed for 3 volumes of CO2, and traditionally it's about 4. But regular sort of those long neck brown bottles, you go past 3, but it can get a little dicey if you have one that's not fully
certified.
Whole. Yeah, exactly. You know, and one bottle breaking at 4 volumes probably isn't the best way to have things go.
It's sour, but it's not smack you in the face sour. It's kind of like grandma's lemonade sour.
Yeah. Lactobacillus can only make about half the acid that Pediococcus can. Pediococcus is responsible for Flanders Reds and Old Bruns and Lambics. It can do about 2% acid, whereas lactobacillus starts killing itself at about 1%. But this is also going to be a much smaller, thinner beer, so that acidity can seem almost as high just because it's so small. And the carbonation can also add to that. It's so carbonated that the carbonic acid will sort of make that acidity really pop and jump.
Now, the first sip, I don't taste it now, but maybe because my taste buds are all soured out. But that first sip, at the end of the sip, I tasted grain. There was, to me, on my palate, I tasted the grain.
It's almost like chewing on some Pilsner malt.
Yeah, exactly. So that's it's kind of the unadulterated, mash water.
Exactly. I mean, this and that's something I taste a little bit in some Berliner Weisses, but it's certainly not something that you have to have in there. I imagine it is probably a result of the lack of the boil.
Huh.
I imagine that's some probably volatiles that are in the grain that normally get volatilized out during the boil, but stuck around because I didn't boil.
Wow. Well, that's enjoyable. I mean, it's not something that I would drink every day.
Yeah.
But on my journey of appreciating beers, I enjoy that. That to me is a good beer. I know nothing about the style.
Yeah.
But I'm enjoying that beer. So what are
and part of it, there's only I think 2 or 3 breweries left doing it in Germany, and a handful of American brew pubs. So it's definitely one of those styles that's dying out.
Ah. So what did the judges say?
So this one won its category.
Hey, all right, woohoo!
This one that combines sour beers and French and Belgian ales. So categories 16 and 17.
So there was more than one beer in the category, right?
Yes, no, amazingly.
Sorry. Wow, terrific! Congratulations.
Yep. No, it's my first ribbon of any sort. Actually, this is the first the first real contest I entered of any sort of note.
Well, now you can retire.
Yeah, like you did.
Yeah, you are now an award-winning homebrewer, and now you can stop entering contests. You've got your laurels to rest on.
I talked to one of the judges after all of the beers that win their categories go on to the best of show round. I guess this one made it to about 10 out of 20. It was eliminated, I think, for that grainy taste, that malty taste. I guess wasn't quite clean enough to where the style sort of says it should essentially just be lactic acid and water.
Well, I mean, now I only tasted that in the first sip, and in subsequent sips, I'm glad I made a mental note of it when I first did taste it because I don't taste it now. So
I get sort of an aftertaste almost. If after you swallow, if you breathe out through your nose, there's sort of a lingering something there.
Well, my allergies are still not completely gone. So, but it would be very difficult, I would think, for this style to win a best of show.
Yeah. I
mean, it is so kind of subtle and complex. And what did win best of show?
It was there's one guy in our homebrew club who essentially dominates everything. I think he won the top 2. It was an IPA one, and then I think his barley wine came in second.
See there. You can't Berliner Weiss against, big malt bombs or hop bombs. It just would be tough to do.
Yeah. Oh, no, I agree, but I was happy to make it in there and happy to win the category.
Well, again, congratulations. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So what have we learned tonight? I mean, we have, as I was, kind of coming up in homebrewing, I learned that bittering hops go at the beginning of the boil. Flavoring hops go at like 15 minutes before the end of the boil, and aroma hops go right, near the end of the boil.
Sure.
And traditionally, that strategy works, but there are other ways to go.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that there's all sorts of other ways that I haven't even looked at yet. I was just talking to one of my friends who's a brewer at Old Dominion, and he was saying that they're looking at a lot of hop teas now. That every single time that you're, if you're boiling a beer, if you're fermenting a beer, if you're transferring a beer, you're losing some amount of the hop aroma and the hop volatiles in that process. And if you can add a hop tea at the end, you're really going to be thrifty on your hops. You're really saving, can be 20%, can be 80% of the hop punch, in each of those steps, and you can use, say 20% less hops on a batch or something if you play around, adding hops later than you might otherwise, using hop teas, using, all these sort of other ideas.
Well, I Twittered that I was going to be talking to you about non-traditional hopping, and Jeff Bearer from Craft Beer Radio said, don't forget to mention glass hopping. There's nothing like a fresh-picked hop cone off the vine, put in your pint glass, to add that just extra little bit of, hop flavor and aroma.
I've also played around with bottle hopping. Putting 3 or 4 hop cones into a bottle before, putting the beer in and camping. And that actually works pretty well, and it's a fun way if you want to play around with dry hopping, say one beer and you want to try it with, 4 or 5 different dry hops or different combinations of dry hops.
And you get a little party favor in every bottle.
Well, the real problem is that it's sort of the Mentos and Coke thing where the hops make nucleation sites, and you have to be ready with sort of a strainer in the glass, start pouring immediately.
and it's not like tequila where you try to drink the worm.
Yeah.
You don't want to drink the hop cone.
Exactly.
So I Twittered back to Jeff and I said about the only hopping opportunity that we haven't explored is the hop bag in the urinal, and that will be the and that's just for aroma, I would assume. So is there anywhere else that you haven't hopped that's left to hop, Mike?
I'm running out of them.
So send in your ideas, and I'll pass them on to Mike Tonsmeire, or as usual, I'll put a link to your blog, the Mad Fermentationist, in the description of this episode on basicbrewingradio.com, and I'll be interested to hear the feedback from the show. This has been wonderful, and I feel kind of guilty for not having the other guys here to share these beers, but not that guilty.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, you probably have some left. Just throw, get your capper out, throw those caps on, give them some flat beer in a couple of days.
Yeah, I'll do that. Well, thanks again, Mike. This has been fun.
Yeah. Thanks for the feedback and the honest feedback, making me feel better about that IPA anyway.
We'll talk to you next time.
Yeah. Thanks, James.
Well, thanks again to Mike. I'll post a link to the Mad Fermentationist blog in the description of this episode on basicbrewingradio.com, and I look forward to the next visit with Mike. If we can have one, that'd be great. It's always fun to hear how he's pushing the boundaries of brewing a bit. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. Again, please don't forget to tell us where you're from. And check the spelling of your email if you're using the form. Check out our low-tech lagering and decoction mashing DVD on basicbrewingshop.com, where you can see Steve Wilkes do a single-step decoction mash, and you can follow me through a lager fermentation in the middle of summer where I don't use a dedicated chest freezer. There are also our original DVDs in Basic Brewing Introduction to Extract Home Brewing. We walk you through the extract brewing process step by step from boiling to bottling. And in Basic Brewing Stepping into All Grain, we take through the all grain process from milling your grain to collecting your wort. We got combo deals to save you a few bucks if you want to buy more than one DVD at a time. And you can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. We got hats and shirts, including our Go Forth and Flocculate shirt. And as usual, thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Harman Kardon HK3385 High Current Stereo Receiver and Evadry Renewable EDV 300/E333 Wireless Mini Dehumidifier. Sounds like somebody's got some condensation problems in the old chest freezer there. Thanks again, everybody. Remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. We appreciate your support. And there is a Kindle link there if you're going to buy one of those things. That's all until next week. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dotson down in Austin. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.